Hello, everybody. While we are waiting for the presentation to kick in, if you can just change your name. Also write maybe your city name, just so we see the diversity we have in the room. Say hello in the chat where you are joining in from. Or if you have any questions that you have already come with, just feel free to put a comment in. Let's see for a couple more seconds, and then I think Natasha can say a quick hello. Hi, Sally and Alison from London. I hope it's sunny still.
No?
So. Well, in Dubrovnik, it's really nice these days.
Okay, so since there's quite a large number of people joining, and we are tight on time as usual, so just a quick hello from my side, and I would like to thank you all for joining this morning. I know that you are all very busy, but you decided to dedicate some of your time to this online forum, and I hope that you will be happy you did that. I won't take any of your time. We have a lot of slides to do, a lot of slides to cover, a lot of topics to cover. So I would just like to wish you all a good morning and good forum. And of course, we encourage you to ask the questions in the chat. So if anything you want to know, please type it in the chat, and we'll try to answer it as soon as we can. So thank you all once more, and Alisa, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Natasha. Well, once more, hello and welcome from my side. I'm Alisa Vlasic, and I'm leading the remote IT network. And thank you, Natasha, from Dura, from Dubrovnik, our lead partner. If we move to the next slide, I just wanted to take really briefly a minute to introduce the remote IT network for the ones that are not within the network or are not familiar with our work so far. Just taking a couple of minutes before I let the floor to Alison and Sally for today's topic. So Remote IT Network, it's funded through URBACT program that is supporting integrated and participatory sustainable urban development in European cities. And we are actually a network of 8 cities across Europe, with Dubrovnik's development agency, Dura, from Croatia, leading the network. We have Camara de Lobos from Portugal, Murcia from Spain, Brindisi from Italy, Tartu from Estonia, Bucharest District 6 from Romania, Heraklion from Greece, and Tirana from Albania. And we are all exploring the transformations that are nowadays happening connected to the future of work, and with hybrid and remote work models significantly impacting the lives of citizens. If we move to the next slide, we'll see that we, as a network of 8 cities, collaboratively exploring how to support actually this whole change through proactive and integrated policymaking. We are taking currently a 2-layer simultaneous approach in observing the remote work from the external perspective. Within the next slide, please. How the remote workers and digital nomads can strengthen the local economic ecosystems, or how it can enhance the sustainable tourism within the cities. But also we are looking into the internal perspective and how the public authorities can actually support the hybrid workspace. So what internal transformations are required within public administrations to support internal staff through this transition that is happening. So far, within our journey, we have explored the remote and hybrid topic in multiple different ways, from podcasts to transnational meetings, site visits, and so on, but also through these online forums. within the URBACT website of Remote IT Network, and I will put the link in a second in the chat. You can actually see all of these output. So you can still hear some of the podcasts that we had, some of the reports from the meetings that we had, and so on. And there is a wealth of knowledge that we have actually explored so far within our journey. In the next slide, we can see that this is the third online forum. And so far, we have explored the remote work and the green transition sometime last year. And then we explored how the digital transformation and the remote work are connected. Today, we are going to talk about the gender equality, the hybrid work, the digital nomads, how all of that is interlinked. And sometime in September, we are again meeting and discussing the incentives for the remote work that are needed. With this, I would actually like to give the floor to our very prestigious speakers today. One you have also met within our previous online forums, Miss Alison Partridge, but she's today joined with her colleague, with Sally Kneeshaw, and they are going to bring the topic of gender equality policies and remote work closer to us. So I give the floor to Alison and Sally. Please, if you can introduce yourselves, the topic, and what is that we are going to hear today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Elisa, and lovely to see everybody. Oh, the slides have gone. Can we have the slides back, please, people? Yes, so today we're going to talk a little bit about gender equality, remote working, and digital nomads. If we go to the next slide. And hopefully this is what you're here to do. We're going to be exploring the relevance of gender equality to you as cities who are interested in supporting remote workers and digital nomads. This online forum will be slightly different to the last one that I was involved in. Last time we had a couple of speakers. And this time, because we have a real expert in Sally, we thought it was probably best to focus on Sally's expertise, which is pan-European. I'll leave Sally to introduce herself, but I think you know a little bit about me. I am Alison Partridge. I'm I guess, veteran lead expert for URBACT. And I also do quite a lot of work in London and the UK to promote inclusion in digital economies. Sally, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Alison, and good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be with you all. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sally Kneeshaw. I've worked with the URBACT programme for about 15 years now, but at programme level and at network level. And I was involved in the first iteration of the Gender Equal Cities work. So have hopefully we'll bring to this discussion some examples and some ideas from that work to help you think about putting a gender lens onto the integrated action plans and the work that you're doing at local level. I'm also involved in the European Urban Initiative capacity building team and work in London on inclusion projects too. So looking forward to spending the next 90 minutes with you guys, just helping to think together about ways to improve all equalities actually, but specifically gender equality at local level.
Thank you, Sally. So the next slide says a little bit about what we're going to try and achieve today. We want to give you an overview and some examples of why and how to incorporate a gender perspective in urban development in your cities. We want to introduce and explain some of the key concepts and examples from the Gender Equal Cities work that URBACT has done so far. And we'll be trying very hard not to duplicate what's being done at programme level on capacity building for gender equality. We want to support you to reflect on embedding gender equality in your city, and also to direct you to other areas where you might be able to find more information and more knowledge, which you can then sort of follow up in due course and hopefully embed in your action plans and in your work in your cities. So this is the broad programme and structure for today. There is quite a lot of content. We will do our best to get through it. There's also plenty of time for question and answer and discussion, I hope. I would encourage you to put any questions in the chat at any point during the session, and we will aim to pause and come back to those questions during the presentation. There will also be opportunities where we will pause and we will ask you to ask questions if you have any comments or questions or reflections. We will finish, excuse me, the content by around 11:15. And at the end, we want to pass over to you and ask you to think about what you might do differently as a result of what you've heard in the online forum. But before we get started, we wanted to kind of understand a little bit more about you as the audience and you as the partners of Remote IT and other cities that have joined and other experts that have joined today. So we've prepared a little quiz. There's only 5 questions. It won't take too long. We're going to do one question at a time, and we'd like you to put your answers in the chat. If you know the answer, put the answer in the chat. If you don't know the answer, that's also absolutely fine. But if you know the answer to the question, please add it in the chat. So, excuse me, the first question is, what is the global gender pay gap? Does anyone know what the global gender pay gap is?
Sorry, Alison, you mean like the number, or what is it in general? The number,
I
the
think
percentage.
That's part of the question. Is how do you interpret the question? Is it, if you know the percentage, put the percentage. If you know the definition, put the definition.
We've got quite a variation coming in the chat. Keep going, it's good.
Okay, so we've got 30%, 15%, 20%, 25%. Okay, we'll come on to the answers in a minute. Someone's Wojciech's in a hurry to get to the answers. I'll go to the next question. What is the percentage of mayors and city leaders in the European Union that are women? So what percentage of mayors or city leaders in the EU are women? So here we are definitely looking for a percentage. So 20%, 10%, 15%, 50%. Any other answers? Excuse me. 32%, that's very specific. Okay, great, thank you. Next question. This is much more specific. What is the percentage of senior ministers in the European Union dealing with environment and climate change that are women? That's taking more of a sectoral lens. Any thoughts on that one? 5%, 40%, 3 to 10%. 7%. I think some people have done their homework. Number 4. Which sustainable development goal, so which number sustainable development goal is related to gender equality? Any other answers? You've got Alisa saying 5, 15. 5. Okay, and then the last question is true or false? Gender equality is about women. I think everyone so far thinks that is false. Great, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Sally, who's going to tell us a little bit more about those answers, which will draw heavily on the work that she's done with URBACT on gender equality.
Thanks, Alison. It made me realise we had 3 questions which had percentage answers and 4 questions which had number answers. So let's go and have a look at the answers to the questions. First question about the global gender pay gap, which gives us the definition you can see on screen. It's expressed as a percentage of men's earnings and represents the difference between the average grossly hourly earnings of female and male employees across the whole labour market. So you can see these stats come from UN Women and from Eurostat. Globally, it was 23% in 2022. And in the European Union in 2022, it was 12.7% as an average. excuse me, but you can see from this chart on the screen that it varies quite a lot between member states for different reasons. So we'll look a bit more about some of the reasons behind the pay gap, but it's quite useful to know you in your own member state, in your cities, what your gender pay gap is. It can form part of your actions at local level. So the next question was around the percentage of mayors and city leaders in the EU that are women. These statistics come from a European Commission report. I think it's 2022 again, so it may have changed a little as we're having elections obviously all the time, but it's around 15%, 15% of city leaders in the EU that are women. So pretty low percentage. In terms of local councillors, that's more like 30%. So that's higher. It's just which women elected representatives become the leaders of their city and the mayors of their city. And you can see from the infographic on screen, it's slightly different at national level and in the European Parliament. And there's more about this kind of data in the Gender Equal Cities report if you're interested to look. And we can look at some of the solutions to this challenge in the next section of this forum. The next question was about senior ministers in the EU dealing with environment and climate change. Quite a technical question. Unlikely most people would know that off the top of their heads. It's around 30%. And you can see on the chart, which was produced by the European Institute of Gender Equality, the countries that have more, the countries that are in bold are the ones that have more women at senior level portfolios with climate action. And the reason that's an important question is to do with which portfolios women politicians get to hold, and also some evidence that when women have climate change portfolios, sustainability is accelerated. That's from UN Women. We can share all of this data afterwards as well. We had a comment in the chat about the speakers being women. URBACT is a very women gender balanced organization, I would say, and we can come on to that because it also relates to local government, I think, as well, the sort of gender profile of local government workers. But good, keep coming with those questions and comments. It's useful to add those. Then the next question about the Sustainable Development Goal. As you probably know, this is the United Nations framework for sustainability. The SDG 5 is, so Elisa posted that straight away. It's about achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. So if your city or your region or your country is committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, this is one of the things they could be measuring around the level to which women and girls are being empowered and achieving equality. Then the final question was about gender equality is about women, true or false, slightly sort of provocative question, and most people answered false. I think what we've written about in the Gender Equal Cities report for URBACT is that basically all genders experience stereotypes and norms and gender blind policies which reduce opportunities to participate fully and equally. Including things like which gender should take parental leave or which gender excels at a particular profession. So these are kind of norms that we're talking about in relation to gender equality. But it's fair to say that it's mostly women who experience the majority of gender-based inequality, but there are also quite important benefits potentially for men and boys, and it's not just about women, it's about equality across all populations and differences. And we'll talk a bit more about things like the economy, peace and justice. There's quite a lot of evidence that more women in the labour market makes it more productive, that women are involved in peace initiatives can make a difference. And ultimately, it's about justice and who has equal rights to the city and to opportunities. So that was the quiz. Thank you very much. Alison, shall I hand back to you for a minute or shall I carry on?
I think it's fine to carry on. I'm just interested to know if any of the cities who are in the Zoom know their gender pay gap for the municipality. If anyone knows the gender pay gap for their municipality, can you put your city and your percentage in the chat just to see if anyone is aware of that information at city level?
Good question, and if not, it's a good action to put in your integrated action plan. To be honest, like this is the kind of data that's really useful. If you don't know what you're measuring, if you don't know what your baseline is, it's really good information to have. So I'm going to just talk for a little bit now about the URBACT's work on gender equal cities that you may or may not be familiar with. and why gender equality is important and why we started this work. I mean, the basic goal of gender equality policy is that women and men should have the same power to shape society and their own lives. It's quite simple, really. And the idea that local government has both legal obligations in relation to equality, but also the power to make the cities more equitable. So URBACT started this work partly because we wanted to recognize the progress that cities have made, make sure cities were understood the power and competence they have at local level, and also because inequality is persistent. And I'm going to show some, you saw it in the quiz, but show some data that you see inequality is persistent and it's quite slow. The progress is quite slow. So to accelerate that could be really good. And then the second, I'm going to go through these, which are kind of some of the challenges, and then hand over to Alison, then talk about a bit about some of the solutions and examples we've seen in cities, and try to focus that a bit specifically onto notions of hybrid working and remote working. So you'll see from the graphics that I'm going to show this gap that's quite persistent and what we can do about it. Next one is, first of all, representation. I talked a bit about this, which is sort of official representation in Europe. Really, equal representation is a democratic imperative, but it also has been proven to be a better pathway to better urban policy and more engaged communities. So when a city's own decision-making structures are fully representative, then you have the interests and experiences of multiple groups included, women and men of different ages, different ethnic groups, different socioeconomic backgrounds, abilities, sexualities. They all bring really valuable life experience to the city's decision-making functions and to local politics. And we also have seen that this creates a ripple effect, so that women and other groups are more likely to become politically active when they see that they're represented, that they're heard. They're more likely to vote in elections and to raise their voices and become civically active. But this parity in formal representation is one element, and it's really important in relation to gender equality. But local democracy is also about informal representation. So participatory processes, public consultation, which require sensitivity to gender quite often. And a gender equal city is one that asks itself, who's here? Who's empowered to take part in this consultation, this decision-making procedure? In regard to pay and employment, you've seen the gender pay gap. So women basically, despite equal pay legislation in most EU member states, this pay gap means that women have less purchasing power and less independence than men. And the causes behind the pay gap are kind of historical. They include labour market segregation, which means that women and men tend to work in different sectors, which are paid differently, and that creates differences in earning potential. And it's also to do with gaps in participation in the labour market, often due to caring responsibilities and motherhood. And there's also what they call a glass ceiling, which means often in terms of seniority, women are less likely to be in senior positions, which are better paid. So we could look at this also in relation to a city's own employment. You know, you all mostly work for local government. What does that mean for local government? Cities can be committed to reduce that internal pay gap, to monitor their internal pay gap and reduce it. And they can incentivize other employers in the city to do the same, whether through information campaigns or procurement or supply chains. And just to say also, public employers often have one of the most visible divisions of labour, in that women tend to have portfolios of education or culture or social services, and men more in financial or transport, construction, infrastructure. And this, along with this sort of senior, so you've got sort of horizontal and vertical segregation going on. And the senior roles, often it's related to the ways you can challenge some of that are things like making more equal parental leave arrangements, so making the caring responsibilities a bit more equal, and looking at pay in local administrations. I think one of the things that we'll come on to later in the solutions is one of the driving forces behind this kind of pay gap and this labour market segregation is to do with career aspirations and what choices get made quite early, actually, in children's lives about which subjects they like and which subjects they're good at. So working with children at quite a young age in relation to opening up these the pathways into well-paying and other careers, and also balancing potentially the pay given to service professions compared to, for instance, tech or engineering. So there are various sort of dynamics and mechanics at play that we can, as local government, work with. I'll talk a bit more about some of the examples of that too. On entrepreneurship, which is obviously of interest to your network, and especially when it comes to digital nomads potentially, who often will be entrepreneurs or self-employed. We know that SMEs are kind of the backbone of the EU economy, employ large amounts of people. I think it was 67% of total employment in EU 28. This is before Brexit. Were from the startup sector in SMEs, and we know that startups are crucial for both equality and growth at local level. In the EU, we can see women constitute 52% of the population, but only 34% of self-employed workers and 30% of entrepreneurs. So there's another gap there about women not becoming business owners and leading startups. And on the right-hand side of the screen, this European venture capital stat is pretty stark. It's one that really makes you stop and think, this is from 2021, this data. I'm sure we could get updated too. But it means that all women founding teams, you can see here, this was at the beginning of the year. In 2021, all women founding teams raised 1.1% of capital, and mixed teams raised 8% of capital. So there's a massive gap in venture capital access for women entrepreneurs, and quite a lot of studies about what will change that. And I think Alison can speak to this a lot because she's involved a lot in startups and entrepreneurship. But it's a lot to do with having venture capital investors who are women, or who they're the ones who make decisions about where money will get invested. That was just a slide about more related to what you're doing. I wanted to include about safety and gender-based violence because it's consistently important, and also important in terms of welcoming women to your cities and having women feel safe and comfortable in your cities. Gender-based violence is basically any type of violence based on someone's gender, from physical to emotional to financial to reproductive violence. And while anybody can be a victim of gender-based violence, women are overwhelmingly the victims. And there's some quite stark statistics you can see on the screen. Women are 10 to 15% more likely to feel unsafe in public space, and 50% of women feeling unsafe in vulnerable areas. In terms of physical and sexual violence, 35% of women who experience that, it's in their own home. And harassment, there's lots of stats about women feeling harassed, both in public space and increasingly in cyberspace, actually, the whole issue about cyber violence. And some of the ways that cities can work with this is to think about public space and safety, to provide shelter and services for women who are victims, and to do some work challenging behaviours, also with younger people, both men and women, girls and boys, around what constitutes respectful behaviour and how to challenge unrespectful behaviour. I think it's my last slide before I go and pass back to Alison in a moment. Also public infrastructure. So I'll talk about this a bit more in relation to specific examples, but basically the physical structure of a city and its services have an impact on the quality of life for everyone, and they're not neutral. Cities are historically designed by men for sort of male patterns of life, and women are underrepresented still in architecture and urban planning, and this has impacts for everyone. I've got a screenshot here about mobility. There's quite a lot of research now about mobility in cities and how men and women move around the city in different ways, often to do with lifestyle. So men will be more likely to make a single trip in a car at the beginning and the end of the day to work. Women tend to use public transport and walk more and have what they call trip chaining. So they will start and they'll maybe drop off the kids. This is assuming women are the primary caregivers, but they'll maybe drop off kids, get some shopping, visit somebody, go to work, come back. And so it's a more a daily pattern of movement that has more different stops to it and is more likely to be using public transport, not only because women obviously drive cars too, but this also links to these sort of patterns around urban mobility, which are softer and greener, which we see more in cities. So most cities are trying to reduce car use, get people into public transport, more healthy ways of moving around the city. So looking at the gender experience really helps to bring you the information you need to make sure that people have equal access to moving around the city, and design services that make it easier for people to do the right thing and to not be disadvantaged one way or another in the way that infrastructure is organized. So just to say, the reason, coming back to the reason URBACT has worked on this is because local government can really make a difference. And we've got this graphic on screen about the different ways in which different departments of the city, different competences of the city can contribute to this. It really can impact everyday lives if you start to think about equality at local level. And URBACT wanted to sort of throw more light on what these urban dimensions are and what some of the solutions might be. And the message is gender equality is everyone's responsibility and for everyone's benefit. The city will be better for everybody when it's designed in a way that promotes equality. A lot of the lessons in the reports are around sort of city departments. You can see which department maybe would be leading on different elements of equality, because it's a cross-cutting issue and kind of needs to be rooted in the whole of the administration. And we can see from the good historical examples, that's what's happened. It becomes sort of a spider that gets rooted across different parts of the city with increasing awareness of how equality impacts on the work that we're doing and how to deliver results on that. So it's about righting historical wrongs and equal access to the city to accelerate progress on that. I'm just going to go quickly through some of the definitions here. And maybe I'll go very fast because these are things that you can look up afterwards, and it's really useful to have these definitions in mind. These are all from the European Institute for Gender Equality, who have a very good sort of glossary and acronyms which help when you're doing training and talking to colleagues to understand what these mean, and to understand that gender is different from biological sex in the sense that it's about social attributes and opportunities that are associated with being female and male, and to the relationships between women and men, girls and boys, as well as to the relationships between women and those between men. So it's a social, gender is a social characteristic. Gender identity is also about somebody's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender. There are more conversations now about gender identity, about non-binary identities, and that impacts too on the way you collect data in cities potentially, because some people will not want to identify potentially as male or female, and some of the advanced cities are working out ways to both respect people's identities but also be able to collect information about their experiences. Gender mainstream, I'll talk a bit more about later, but this is about a strategy towards realizing gender equality, and it means integrating the gender perspective into preparation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies. So it's really that, I'll show you a spider diagram, how it's really about anchoring gender equality and making it something that's consistently thought about and monitored across all elements of the city's work, and also at national level and international level. Gender budgeting is pretty linked. It's a form of gender mainstreaming where you have a gender-based assessment of the city budget, and you are thinking, when the city is spending money, who is this going to benefit? How do we measure whether this is an investment that's going to benefit across both all the communities, including on gender equality? And several cities do this very effectively. And finally, on the definitions, this is a really useful kind of scale in a way of the actions that you could take going from gender negative, because often when we're gender blind or gender negative, the two dots to the left-hand side of the screen, you can reinforce inequalities, sometimes inadvertently. If you continue on a path without having thought about it, some of the actions you take will reinforce an inequality. And we can move towards being gender sensitive, where you're acknowledging gender issues, you're starting to think about them, to gender specific, and then to gender transformative. where a program contributes to changing gender norms and looking at the root cause of gender equality. This is from a World Health Organization program which works with rural communities. But we want to be moving towards gender transformative, which not only is sensitive, but understands why and challenges the root causes of a problem related to inequality. So I'm going to hand over to Alison after that and then come back with some examples later. Over to you, Alison.
Great, thank you, Sally. A lot of very dense content there, and hopefully some of you were already aware of this work. I hope that you were. Hopefully a lot of you have already read some of the Gender Equal Cities work that URBACT has produced and joined some of their online webinars. Does anyone have any comments or questions or reflections before I say a little bit about how this might link to remote working and digital nomads? Feel free to put any comments or questions in the chat, or if you want to speak, just put your hand up and we can take questions or comments now. No? Alisa, perhaps while I'm talking, while you're listening to me intently, you could just have a look at the people in the group and see how many people in the group are women. And how many men we have on the call. I think that might be an interesting. I mean, I think there are a lot of women in this network anyway, but I think it would just be interesting to have a look at that while we're talking. Okay, so I'm going to talk. This was quite stretching, actually. This was quite challenging. I already find, as you know, the remote IT sort of dual lens of digital nomads and remote working is there's already quite a lot there. And then you try and look at how gender equality might map into that and it be embedded into that, and it becomes even more complicated. So this was quite challenging to think about. So what I've done is I've just put for both digital nomads and for hybrid working, I've just put a couple of slides together where I consider what the implications are for digital nomads and gender equality if you're thinking about these two things together. And maybe what cities might want to do to improve a woman's experience, for example, of digital nomad, or, sorry, can we just go back? To improve a woman's experience of being a digital nomad, or to improve a woman's example of experience of being a hybrid worker. So we start with digital nomads. Very little evidence or data out there, as you know, generally on digital nomads. And we've talked about that at length in the network, and even less, of course, on the gender division within digital nomads. But I did find one statistic, which was that 60%, approximately 60% of digital nomads worldwide are men, which I think in itself is already quite interesting. And I think, things to think about at city level when you're considering how gender equality relates to digital nomads. Digital nomads often have a better work-life balance and more flexibility. That can be good for both men and women and parents, but I think it's something to think about. I think when you're moving from city to city as a digital nomad, one of the things as a woman and as a man you will be thinking about will be safety and mobility, your ability to move around safely, your ability to linger in public spaces safely, your ability not to feel threatened in a public space. So I think that's something also to consider when thinking about your cities, how welcoming they are from a public realm perspective. What's happening with these slides? Tibor, what's happening to the slides? There we go. Thank you. So I think that's something else that's worth thinking about. And then one of the things we talked about quite a lot in Madeira was the culture and the community and the lack of representation and how that can feel quite difficult for women when they don't feel welcome. And if you remember in Madeira, we were talking about the sort of bro culture, the sort of male-led entrepreneur culture, which a lot of the role models in entrepreneurship and digital nomads are men. And that can feel quite intimidating for women. So that's all around how welcoming and how a sense of community and being able to see yourself in the entrepreneurship and digital nomad community. And then finally, quite often digital nomad visas require proof of income. And given that we know that the gender pay gap is quite large, that can also disadvantage women. So you could argue that it's actually more difficult for a woman to get a digital nomad visa if it relates to the gender pay gap as well. So what can cities do to improve the situation for women who are looking to become digital nomads or come to your cities as digital nomads? And a lot of this relates to what Sally's already said. So you want to be looking to create safe and inclusive infrastructure, excuse me, both in terms of public spaces, but specifically here in your network for co-working spaces and housing. These are two areas that I know a lot of your cities are looking at. So have you thought about how those co-working spaces might act more differently for women? And is there childcare nearby? Not that childcare is only a women's issue, I hasten to add. Are they easily accessible by public transport? Is there, for example, a mother's room, a prayer room? All of these things you might want to think about in your co-working space. Then there's lots that you can do, and this is an area that I'm very interested in to support women in business and technology. A lot of this is about creating role models, enabling women to see themselves in the entrepreneurship space. Sorry. But also to provide support and funding for women specifically who might have confidence issues and issues accessing finance in particular. I'm so sorry, I'm going to have a quick drink. Sorry about that. So lots that can be done to support women, and a lot of that is enabling the women to see themselves in the digital nomad community. If women are feeling unsafe, it's also good to actively promote safety and to think about how you might offer women's health services. Sally, I'm so sorry, you might have to take over for a minute. I just need to go and clear my throat.
No problem. Alison's got a bit of a cold this week, so she's got the meds and is hoping to join us again shortly. So in terms of what cities can do to improve this, a lot of this sort of echoes what we've already talked about, and I'll give some examples in a moment from cities that are able to or have given thought to the kind of programs that would do this, and supporting women in business and tech, funding programs, actively promoting safety and well-being, things like emergency support, legal support, women's health services. So if you're a digital nomad, would you easily be able to access those kind of services, find them? Is the signposting there for you? Building welcome and inclusive community. So do women feel good walking into an event, to a networking space? Are you okay, Alison? Can I hand back?
I am, sorry about that.
No worries.
And all of these kind of relate to the issues that I outlined on the previous slide. So, have a look at your digital nomad policy, if you have one, and think about if there might be some issues there which are more difficult for women to tackle than for men. And finally, really celebrate. If you have women coming into your city to work as digital nomads, really celebrate them, enable other women to see themselves as digital nomads in your city. There's a saying in English, which is, you can't be what you can't see. So if you can see yourself in the community, you're much more likely to want to be in that community. And that will be the same for digital nomads. So the next slide is a set of issues you might want to think about when thinking about gender equality and remote workers. So again, for hybrid working, it offers more flexibility, which makes it easier to balance with different responsibilities. I hate to stereotype women as the carers, but the evidence is that they often do take on the caring responsibilities. So, remote working can be very, very good for women from that perspective. But also, as Sally has already said, they're much more likely to work in roles in the public sector like teaching or healthcare or social work, which are actually not adaptable to hybrid models, whereas office-based jobs are often more male-dominated, so that can have an impact on the women's ability to do their job remotely. And linked to that, there's a risk of proximity bias. So carers that are more likely to work remotely are therefore not spending time in the office, not spending time with their team, not spending time with their senior colleagues. And there's an increasing amount of evidence that this can lead to them being overlooked or even seen as less committed in the workspace. If you're not in front of people, visible to people, you might be perceived as less committed. And there's also increasing amount of evidence that female remote workers might take on a larger share of care and domestic responsibilities. So even juggling even more, as if it wasn't already quite difficult to juggle home responsibilities with work responsibilities, the ability to work from home may also increase the amount of juggling that women have to do, and can actually therefore reinforce stereotypes and feed into some of the gender disaggregation that Sally talked about. And one statistic is that women are 8.6% more productive when working remotely. I know I am. But this doesn't necessarily translate into increased pay. So this could also feed into a risk of an even more greatly increased gender pay gap. So what can cities do to deal with some of those issues? And these are all very tightly related to the issues that I've outlined. I think the most important thing is to make sure there is equality of access to remote and hybrid work across all different sectors and all different levels of work, offering career support, digital skills training and childcare support, promoting really inclusive work environments, so family flexible, but not stereotyping women as parents and carers and men as workers, and also addressing this issue of proximity bias. If you do have more women working at home, are they inadvertently and subconsciously being overlooked by senior staff and therefore not being promoted and not having the ability to progress in their careers? Again, coming back to co-working spaces and digital infrastructure, it's really important to think about how women access those spaces and how they experience those spaces. And sometimes it might be worth thinking about, if you have female staff working in co-working spaces as hybrid workers, can you co-locate relevant facilities and flexible services to make their lives a little bit easier and to reduce the pressure that they might feel having to juggle all of their different responsibilities? Increasingly in the European Union, less so now in the UK, and increasing pressure on people. So one thing that the cities could consider is, can you support well-being in the staff by actually having active and explicit the right to disconnect, so that men and women are able to disconnect from work and have better life and welfare. And finally, and this links to what Sally's talked about, it's really, really, really important that women are involved in decision making at all levels, not just when it comes to gender, but at all levels and in an equal way, and that they have equal access to those decision making forums. And we talk about that a lot. And sometimes these things are very subtle. Women might be in the room, but do they hold the mic? Do they have as much airtime as their male colleagues? Quite often, if you observe yourself in a meeting, you might find that the men in the room speak a lot more than women. And sometimes you just don't feel like you have permission to speak in some forums. So I think involving women in decision making is a lot more than having them in the room. Excuse me, I made it. I'm going to hand back to Sally now, who's going to give us some examples of gender equality in cities. I'm so sorry.
Thanks, Alison. You have a drink and a break. I think those are really important points, much more focused on the remote IT themes. And this whole concept of involving women in decision-making, participation and representation is a strong theme. And I wonder if it would be really interesting, could you put in the chat if you, as part of your local group work, have managed to have forums with women-only digital nomads or remote workers? Have you tried any sort of gender disaggregated conversations around their views on what would make their situation better, what would make the city more welcoming, what kind of needs they have, and also at work as well, within your own organizations, but also with other companies and businesses and employers in your city. So it'd be really interesting to know if you have already done that, and also maybe think about what that might mean for you going forward in your integrated action plans. But I'm going to flick through some slides now about learning from others. So give some examples that we have picked up through the Gender Equal Cities work from cities across the European Union of different sizes. And I'm going to start with one of the front runners because it's really hard not to bring in Vienna to any conversation like this. You might know that Vienna is probably the front runner city, maybe even globally, but certainly in Europe. And I'm going to talk a bit about you can read a lot about their work, both in our reporting and generally. And the good thing about Vienna is they've produced some really good guidance for other cities, including on gender budgeting. I saw that in the chat, and on gender mainstreaming. So I'll talk a bit about what they've done, and there are a lot more resources available. And I think obviously they're a capital city. They've got a strong history and resources, but it doesn't mean to say that other cities couldn't also get involved in doing a lot of these actions. And the particular things I'm going to focus on for Vienna, which I think are quite relevant to your work in remote IT, are this concept of mainstreaming, procurement. Edgar, are you still on board? I saw Edgar join this forum, and if he's on board, I want to give the mic to Edgar at some point, because he's the lead partner of Gen Procure, which is doing amazing work on procurement in gender equality procurement. So he will have some really interesting things to say, I think. But also on housing and data. And just to say, when you ask Vienna what their success factors are, they will say several things. One is make gender differences visible. Don't be afraid to show the visibility of these gender differences. Provide a lot of support. They provide support to staff, to their supply chain, to the public. You know, you need to help people on this journey towards understanding and being more sensitive to gender. They have very efficient reporting and controlling systems. So they have these policies, but they also go back at regular intervals to check, are you doing that? What data do you have? Have we made a progress? Let's see where the dial is moving. And they do quite a lot of pilot projects. So this also lends itself to the URBACT model, I think, that you can use testing actions and pilots to put your foot in the water and make some of these changes. So the first one is about public space and housing. Eva Kyle was the gender planning expert. She's now retired, but she's quite well known as one of the pioneers of feminist architecture, in a sense, and planning. And as she says here, Vienna realized very early on that there's a strong connection between the quality of everyday life and the physical structure of the city. So we started to occupy ourselves about public space. Again, there's lots of examples of what they've done, but I would say the key factors are things like mixed use, family friendly, greener neighborhoods. The 15-minute city has become a bit of a popular idea lately, but actually the sort of proximity planning has been going on for quite a long time, and is quite a useful concept when it comes to gender, because it shortens the distances that are needed to integrate care, work, leisure, all the things the elements that you have that make up a good life. City of short distances, things like urban symbols. So they paid attention to things like what are the streets called? What do the statues look like? How do we make women feel like this is their city too? They have a whole new neighborhood, which all the street names are women's names. Things like lighting, seating, water, toilets. These are kind of the basics, but women will benefit from having all of those things integrated into public space. Like Alison said, a place to sit, a place where you want to spend time, linger, stare into space, meet your friends, all really important. And also toilets. There's a lot of evidence women physiologically, for all sorts of reasons, need to go to the bathroom more than men do. So having public toilets can make the difference. Actually, for instance, for older women, to maintain their independence, that they want to be able to walk to the shops and sit and have a cup of coffee, but they're going to need to go to the bathroom at some point. So very basic stuff, but important. They've done quite a lot of work on parks, working with women and girls, boys and men, about what do they want from a public park, and redesigning parks in a way that meets those needs. And to have no one group dominating. This is quite important in public space. Don't have any one group. Try and redesign spaces. I think Ileana's on board. Ileana Toscana would also have some things to say about how we redesign spaces in a way that become multifunctional, but also that used by lots of different groups together. In terms of housing in Vienna, very amazingly successful, or Vienna housing, for all sorts of reasons, some of which other cities may have difficulty replicating. But for instance, when Eva Kyle was in charge of that department, they would make sure that the commissions that they had for public housing being built had a gender perspective, and had thought about family-friendly factors, including single-parent households needing maybe more bedrooms, having a fixed amount of space that the developer is working to, but making that into enough bedrooms so the single mom wasn't sleeping on the sofa to give her kids a bedroom. The understanding the lives of women and families in a way that then feeds into the design of the housing. They sometimes had women-only architecture competitions partly to encourage a supply chain of female architects, but to have women's perspectives on an architecture of a particular space. And when you do a look around, they will do tours of their housing in Vienna, things like connectivity, communal spaces, having 5-story high buildings, because after 5 stories, your eyes to the street are different, and often these will overlook play areas. So you can be in your apartment and look down and see older people and young people playing. And of course, affordability is a massive factor here, making sure that housing is affordable. So I would encourage you to also read more about the Vienna experience, which is quite incredible on that front. The next thing is about data, and data actually underpins everything that you need to do related to equality, because you need to know what your baseline is and how much you're progressing. So gender disaggregated data is pretty key as a way of shaping all aspects of public and private services, and to understand how the city operates in terms of gender. And to interpret the differences you might look at are things like pay, which we talked about, household income, family structure, business ownership, housing tenure, use of health services and education, and public transport. You can see this chart is one that is from 2011. You see how old that is. So the modal split of Vienna's population by purpose of trip from 2011. So they were able to crunch that level of data of looking at who was using which mode of transport at what time of day and for what reason, disaggregated by gender, which helped them to understand, oh, we need to make sure that the public transport is more accessible or cheaper, and we need to run services in a particular direction. And we see how men and women are moving differently around the city, and we can encourage softer mobility and provide services that meet that need. So they've been doing this for a long time. You can see that that's part of their success. So gender budgeting, which has been asked about in the questions, which Vienna do as well. It's about knowing where the public money is spent and who benefits. So if you have a big infrastructure project, that's a lot of money. How is this going to help both men and women, boys and girls, in terms of the way that it's designed? For instance, including clauses, consulting with different groups around that investment. This is the mainstreaming spider diagram that I really like, because it helps people to understand. So Vienna, they have had one of the longest legacies of gender mainstreaming. The office opened in 1992. The gender mainstreaming offices has been opened ever since. And there's a political commitment to this, which is ongoing, which makes a massive difference, because this is long-term work. It's not short-term work, I think. There are small steps you can take, definitely, but it requires quite a long-term commitment to really get to this level of results. Gender budgeting has been embedded in the city constitution since 2006, so they can see the results of that. And this is what it looks like in practice. They have a central unit which has quite a lot of political power. It sits quite close to the mayor's office in terms of the sort of dynamics of the city. They have 23 districts who do their own budgeting, and they have a kind of mostly a staff member in all of these different parts of the city, which are departments: the Department for Healthcare, Department for Women's Issues, Financial Affairs, Economic Affairs, the Business Agency, and they operate like a network, so that they have both a central resource, but also staff all around the city whose job it is to help with gender budgeting, gender mainstreaming, thinking about the gender perspective on everything they're doing as a city. And this is like Rolls-Royce gold standard kind of gender mainstreaming, but you can adapt that and think about how that might work in your city, and it's a really good aspiration to have, I think. procurement, and I don't know if Edgar's still on board or if he's gone quiet, but I do think Vienna procurement is a really good tool also for all cities, and one that's really underused at the moment. We have an URBACT network that's coming up with some great work on how to include gender equality clauses in your procurement. Every year, we have public authorities in Europe spending about 14% of GDP on the purchase of services, works, and supplies. So that's a massive amount of spending power that we have together, both at national and at local level. But you think about what your budget is as a city and how you might use that as a lever to include equality clauses. The types of clauses, and Vienna has done this. There's a training module which we can refer you to online in URBACT with some interviews with the team from Vienna about how this operates, literally the mechanics of how they make this work, how they insert these clauses, for instance, in construction, in services, in transport, in elder care. So you would put these clauses in, and a supplier would get extra points if they agree to, for instance, hire more women bus drivers, or provide flexible working, have an anti-harassment policy in their workplace, provide improved parental leave balance between men and women. So these are things that are legal, you can do them, talk to your procurement team, and there are quite a lot of model clauses that you can make use of as well to think about how to do that. And in terms of remote working, there's quite a lot. I think that Alison mentioned that you can actually manage to get into supply chains potentially through a procurement model, and Vienna has a lot of experience of this. I'm going to move to Umeå now, another city in the north of Sweden, which is a pretty advanced on gender equality. And again, we can provide you with some really good links to what they're doing. Two examples here. One is on participation, actually. There's a Swedish study in 2015 showed that from the age of 8, the imbalance between boys and girls in parks was 80-20. So teenage girls felt 10 times more unsafe to be in public space. And that's quite common. One of the things you can observe as a result of this is look at who is using public space and who's in parks, and see, especially with teenagers, who's able to use that space. So in Umeå, they did what they called inclusion through exclusion. They did some work. They identified a space for a new park in the city right by the river. And they worked with young women in a workshop format to ask them, what do you want from public space? What would encourage you to feel like it's your space too, and you can be there together? And the result was this park, which is called Free Zone. What a lot of the women, and Vienna have done similar work, Ileana might have references to other similar work. The results are often quite common. Girls say they want to see and not be seen. So they quite like sort of tree houses or spaces where they can huddle together and talk, but not be completely visible. Also from that is clear sight lines and exits. So you need at least probably 2 ways out of a space that you can see clearly. That's about safety as well, and lighting. So you never feel like you're boxed in, or and that's true for all of public space, I think. Clear sight lines and ways to move out of a space safely. This had circular seating. Circular seating comes up a lot, like hammocks and benches, and these girls are on. They created a kind of a carousel which has circular swings, so the girls could sit together and put their legs in the middle. This is not just for girls, I have to say. This space is open to everybody. This is the whole point, is it's good for everybody. But as a result, and the last thing was music. They've put speakers in the roof of the carousel, and you can connect to it with your Wi-Fi or with your phone and play music in that space. And it's been quite a successful redevelopment of a park in Umeå. The other thing Umeå have done, which is worth looking up, is they redesigned a tunnel that goes into the main railway station to make it, and their bus stops. They looked at the bus stops, especially, for instance, by the hospital, where it's mostly a female workforce, and redesigned those to be very well lit, to have real-time information. So as we know when the bus is coming, we know when to go out when it's cold, and we feel like we are both visible but also safe, and it's welcoming. So they've done quite a lot of work thinking about their transport infrastructure and how to plan that for women's well-being and safety. Wanted to talk a bit about STEM careers and entrepreneurship. Examples from Barcelona, from La Rochelle, and actually there's a new good practice on the URBACT website from a smaller city in Catalonia called URBACT that's working on STEAM in schools. This is about representation in careers which are where women are underrepresented, which would be particularly science, technology, engineering, and maths, which are lead to well-paid professions on the whole. And also the lack of women in those professions mean that often the solutions, either by coding or by construction, will miss out on this whole perspective of what women want from the solutions or from the services. But for Barcelona, as part of an URBACT network, they invested 2 million euros over 3 years to try and get more women into the tech sector, with lots of different measures, including training, networking, working with young people, including in procurement clauses, in the promotion of women in these sectors. So really sort of strong interventions to help women to get steps into those careers from a young age, but also women returning to the workforce, also women from other marginalized groups to give them the confidence to move into those careers. And in terms of entrepreneurship on the right-hand side, we need women in the local economy. We need women's entrepreneurial potential to maximize both equality and growth. But as Alison has mentioned, for women establishing and running a business, they face maybe additional challenges related to norms, confidence, but also access to capital, access to technology, access to space and networks. So these can really be facilitated by supporting women's businesses, running women's business networks, having spaces in your cities, co-working spaces, thinking about how to help women to take those steps into starting and growing businesses. And we have examples, for instance, in Germany, in Berlin, there's a Weiber Wirtschaft, a space for women entrepreneurs. In lots of cities, I think you'll find there are spaces and services for women entrepreneurs that are really useful. Milan, this was an example that actually came from sort of an NGO working with the city, the Milan Gender Atlas. And this is quite a nice potential action for you guys at local level too, I think, where you work with a group of women to produce an atlas of your city. They went out, they did some analysis, talked to people, made a map of the city, and they published it in this form of where women feel like it's a good place to be, what could be improved, and also with quite a strong emphasis on care, this whole idea that women take an additional burden of care, whether that's by care we mean things like cleaning, shopping, cooking, taking care of relatives, whether that's children, elderly relatives, and having a city that understands that care and makes it easier for women. They've incorporated that into this gender atlas too, this specific sort of care. There's another example actually from Bogota in Colombia, where they've sort of labeled their city the care city and care blocks, thinking about what it means to care and how to help all of us to integrate care into our lives and the city's role in that. I think this is my last slide now. I just wanted to talk a bit about intersectionality and power, really. Intersectionality is a term that was coined by an American legal scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's about looking at all the different identities that can overlap for discrimination and marginalization. So things like race, class, religious background, socioeconomic background, whether you're disabled, and these can make you can add to disadvantage and exclusion. So just to say, these are the women's voices that we need to center and their needs. Often they're not very visible or audible. So I think it's the job of us in our local groups and cities to seek that out, to understand who is not in the room and to think about those power dynamics and create environments and spaces where those voices are welcomed and feel heard. So I think I'm going to hand over back to Alison now. Hopefully we're on time, and I'd really be interested in any questions or examples you have from your work, and we can make sure you have lots of references to they're coming into the chat, which is great. Thanks, Elisa. But we can make sure you've got lots of references to look more into any of these steps. And I think quite a lot of these steps could also become testing actions or actions in your integrated action plans going forward. So I'll pass to you, Alison. Yeah.
Thanks, Ali. Again, lots of really valuable information, a lot of information to take in a very short amount of time. I will encourage cities and other participants to put their hand up if they want to ask a question. or put their question or comment into the chat. Maybe I'll just start with one question, Sally, if that's okay. A lot of the examples that you've talked about are from quite large cities, and obviously remote IT are mostly small and medium-sized towns and cities. Do you have any advice in terms of where to start? Because I would imagine this is quite overwhelming. There's a lot of information, and you kind of feel, gosh, they started in 1992, whatever it was, and we're here in 2026, 2025. What do we do first? Where do we go? What do we use this information for? So any thoughts on that, Sally?
Yeah, I understand this. We're always looking for examples and case studies from smaller cities, and there are smaller cities. It's just sometimes harder to find them, and sometimes then the city doesn't realize what they're doing is a gender equality action. I think sometimes it's not always called that. But in terms of starting out, I would say gender equality plan is always a good place to start. Actually do an audit, think about what are we doing, where are the gaps, what data do we have, and starting from a basis of that. There is a really good charter from the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, which is a charter the city can sign about which states sort of aspirations and commitments around gender equality, and use those resources as a way of identifying a path. I think the URBACT action planning networks, the testing actions are a really good way to get started. You can do something really small, like let's have a forum of women digital nomads and see what they say, and build from that. I don't know if Edgar's on board, because I know the Gen Procure Network have been doing some really good testing actions, like let's have a meeting to raise gender awareness in our supply chain. These things are small, but they can really, this is how you start to grow it. And look at gender equality clauses. Try one. Go to your procurement team and say, is there an upcoming commission that we could try and add a gender equality clause to, and see how well it works. So I think small steps are really important, and we would like to hear about those, because I think as well as showing these massive successful big city stuff, the small steps are really important too, and to be able to build on those.
Thank you. Any questions from other participants? I might ask you one more, Sally, sorry. Just related to what I was saying before, so I think we actually do have 11 men on the call out of 46 or 47 people, so that's pretty good, I reckon. How do you think, Sally, to stop this being a women-only issue in cities, do you have any advice from your work with URBACT and elsewhere that these cities can take on board to try and make it more of a something that people can see themselves in, this area of work?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. It'd be good to have other people's thoughts on that, including any men or women on the call. I mean, the basic thing is gender equality does benefit everybody. Inclusive design benefits everybody in the community. I think some of the training that the program level training in URBACT that has started, I was in one of the breakout groups of the first training, and I think just having these conversations and raising awareness about what we mean by gender equality, about women's views on it as well as men's views on it, are really important. I think for men, to be the fact that they're listening, they're here, to be an ally for women, to notice when perhaps the women's perspective isn't being heard or listened to promote gender equality is really helpful. Sometimes men will listen to men more than women. I don't know if that's an unfair thing to say, but some of my life experience maybe will show that. But getting men on board is really important, and to understand that this is beneficial to everybody. You'll have a better city, you'll have better services if you just think about the gender equality lens on a lot of this. But I could ask you the same question, Alison. Have you got any responses to that?
Very good question back to me. Thank you for that. I think it is helping men not be scared to speak, but also helping them understand, and they're never going to have the same lived experience as women, but helping them understand why these issues are important and why it will make a difference to the quality of life and the economy for businesses and residents of the city, which I'll always start with evidence. So, looking at what evidence there is of women's experience, maybe gathering some evidence of women's experience and men's experience of the city and seeing how it differs. So I think an evidence-based approach is always useful. Do any of the men on the call want to make any comments on this? I'd be really interested. Lucian, I can see I think you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to say how you view this?
Okay, I will speak. I'm not afraid to. Okay, my name is Lucian Vereshagin. I'm from the city of Bucharest, District 6. I found your presentation quite exciting. I mean, there are aspects I would never thought about it. For example, I really enjoyed the example of UMEA from Sweden. And since in District 6, we are now, let's say, in the process of designing no more than 3 parks for the city, because the District 6 lacks of parks. So we have, let's say, we have the luck to have a new team in the district that really emphasizes upon public spaces. So let's say that we are now in a moment where we are designing those 3 parks, and the idea of having them designed with an eye on, let's say, on women, not only. I mean, we have an eye on sports, that's for sure. I mean, we have lots of sports facilities and small children facilities, playgrounds, but we never thought of this aspect of, of those round spaces you mentioned. And I was wondering if we could get more insights of what the people of the guys or the girls in UMEA did. And this also would help us, because for at least 2 out of the 3 parks, we want to get some financing, European financing. And when coming to new European Bauhaus, integration of all people is highly prized. So if we can include things that are, let's say, that get more women or more girls into the park, and we could justify the choice of those facilities with UMEA experience, I think that for us also would be better, because we could get, let's say, more points. But yeah, we're not talking about points, but we're talking about le bien-être de tout le monde. Just
Thank you.
To put it in English, yeah.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. I'm sure some of the links in the Elisa's already put in the chat do have a lot more information. Sally, can you put any other links in the chat with UMEA in particular?
Yeah, UMEA and Vienna have both published information about how they did their park redesigns. I think that sounds like a great opportunity. The sport question is a really interesting one. And the whole disappearance of girls in public space has an impact on their health. They're less willing to exercise in public. So, and actually Vienna has done even things like the commissions could include the size of the equipment. Like, women's hands and bodies are different. If you're going to do an outdoor gym, for instance, if you're going to do an outdoor gym, don't make it so visible, or put some trees around it. But and in UMEA, they had the example of the football, which is a great story. They had a big football training ground which was dominated by use by boys, and the city introduced quite a long time ago a system where they had to share the training ground between boys and girls teams. Soccer's very strong in Sweden, as you know, probably. And then they had a system where whoever was doing the best in their league could get the first choice of training times. And as a result of that, the women's team won the European Cup. So, and there was a lot of resistance to start with to that whole concept, but now everybody's on board with it, because UMEA women's team are top of Europe, kind of thing, or were. But I think that whole being brave about who gets to use those spaces and it's actually about spatial justice too. I see it in my when you think about these things, you can never not see them again. So I walk around my local park thinking, why is it only a football ground with boys on it? What are the girls doing at this point? And trying to think about what facilities the girls are able to use. So good for you. I think it's a good opportunity, and we'll try to make sure you've got more resource. With Vienna, I know they also asked lots of people, and for instance, the older people wanted a particular type of garden where they could plant. They wanted to have a gardening club and to be able to come together and plant together. And it was really quite beautiful, the park that they made, because they tried to look at what everybody needed and wanted in that space, and it became a really actively used, quite small park, but really, really lovely. So good for you, and we'll try and make sure you've got more information. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, thinking about also using the city-to-city exchange with UNEA, maybe that would be a good idea for us. But you gave me some good insights today, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, one last thing for you to do now. I'm going to put a link in the chat. And what we want you to do is to, and we're not going to hold you to this, don't worry, this is not you signing away your lives. But just thinking about everything that you've heard in the last hour or so, is the one thing that you could start in your city that you think would make a difference to gender equality when it comes to hybrid working and digital nomads? So if you can access the Google Doc link that I've just put into the chat and just put your city name and one action you think you might be able to start in your city, it'd be really good to collect that before we finish. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll have a look at the results. So it's your city name and one action. It'd be great to see one action from every city in the network.
I like the question, why just one? Yeah, feel free. Add loads of actions.
Okay, just a couple more minutes, or maybe one more minute. And Tibor, maybe you could take the slide deck down and share the Google Doc if that's possible, or I can.
Make it a bit bigger, Alison. It's quite hard to see.
Again, Sally? Make it bigger.
Yeah, please. Yeah, to make it a bit bigger on screen.
Better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So thank you for, I mean, you can carry on. Please do carry on. I'm struck, first of all, by there's quite a lot here about public spaces. So I think we've definitely landed a message around the importance of thinking about gender equality in public spaces. Also about raising awareness. You know, that whole thing that I said, you can't be what you can't see, and starting young with young people, pupils and students. Raising awareness more generally around the gender gap. And I think that's a very, very important place to start. A lot about childcare, no surprises there. I think, you know, let's not always forget that childcare is an issue for men and women, but women do definitely bear the main responsibility traditionally when it comes to women. And I really like this one about public procurement. We're trying to listen to our suppliers and collect data that demonstrates what challenges our enterprises have. We want to raise awareness and have a session on capacity building. Heraklion, lighting, neighbourhoods and parks, and also reconstructing the gender equality plan. And yeah, Tatu, congratulations. It looks like from next year you'll have a formal gender pay gap to reduce inequality between the genders. Of course, having the data doesn't necessarily in itself reduce the gender pay gap. You then have to use the data and have a lot of work around how to actually affect change within that sector. Let me just go back to the screen, which I haven't. Oh, Kamala de Lobos, a networking platform, creating an online community for remote workers to share opportunities, discuss challenges. Joelle, if that was you, is that an online community for everybody, or is that for women only? How will you try and encourage that to focus mostly on gender? Or one of the other teams from Kamala de Lobos?
Just for women.
Just for women. Okay, interesting. Thank you. And Leskovac is just adding one around public spaces and facilities. So keep them coming. We'd like to collect this anyway. I think it's useful for your network and for the future transnational meetings to have this information collected. Very conscious we've only got 4 minutes left, and I wanted to hand over to Alisa and Natasha just to share any comments and reflections before we close. And thanks for having us.
Well, first of all, thank you, like a massive, massive thank you, both of you, to Alison and Sally. I think the presentation was really, really interesting. At the beginning, when we were just discussing the topic, at one point there was like, is this really a relevant topic? Why to discuss about the gender issues, gender equality, when we are discussing about remote work, the digital nomads, the hybrid work, and so on? And I think this presentation just proved how important, how relevant the topic is, actually across any of the topics, talking from housing to public space to everything else. But I would get back to maybe something that, if I'm not mistaken, in most of our integrated action plans is connected, the digital infrastructure, the co-working spaces. So I can already see some very immediate steps, some takeaways that we can take from here. From this session, I really enjoyed the examples. There are very specific examples. And although they are quite large-scale examples, I think there are bits and pieces that can be taken and used immediately. And the part that you, Sally, I think you mentioned the gender equality plan. I would definitely say that as a first step to kind of see where we stand, what's the information that there is available and so on, and then build from that. I think there are so many takeaways that I cannot just kind of wrap it up, but I think the topic has been super relevant for our network, for our journey within Remote IT Network. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it reflect within our city action plans in the future. I would like to hand over to Natasha, to our lead partner, to Dubrovnik, just to close the session for the day. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Yes, Alicia, you actually gave me a good intro. So you practically said everything I wanted to say about the presentations. Once again, we didn't have any doubts that both of our speakers will bring out so many interesting information, but also make us, reflect on the situations within our cities and how can we improve this gender gap challenge and what can we do in our own local kind of communities, to raise awareness and make people think about this. Maybe some of us actually aren't aware still on how much the gender question is still actual, how still many countries, even though quite progressive and quite maybe we can say wealthy in all layers, are still denying the fact that there are quite a lot of differences between men and women, especially when it comes to work, and that a lot of women are taken for granted in everything that they do, and both professionally and privately. So yeah, thank you so much for eye-opening, I guess, for many people here in the forum, and thank you for bringing out the concrete numbers, which actually are the biggest eye-opener, I think. So thank you, speakers. Thank you, Alisa. Thanks all partners and all other stakeholders who joined us today. We are on time. I hope that you found it interesting. If you want to ask any questions, if you kind of think about questions later on during the day, please feel free to send it to us, and we will make sure that we forward them to either Sally or Alison, for the answers. And yes, that's more or less it. We wish you a good rest of the day, and thank you for being today with us. That's it. So guys, see you again. We are open to questions, and have a nice day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see you all.
It was a pleasure. As always.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you. Thank you.